Hey everyone, this is the Bava from Nightlight Astrology, and today we're going to take a look at Mars retrograde in Aries. Now, this is a transit that I've been talking about over the course of the summer months. Mars went into the sign of Aries after the summer solstice in late June, if I'm remembering correctly. And Mars is going to be in Aries now, retrograde all the way through the middle of November, starting tomorrow and into Friday. So retrograde is happening over the next 2 days. We're really going to see it, Mars turn and start moving retrograde. So this retrograde is after Mars finishes its retrograde in mid-November. Then Mars is going to push forward in Aries and not finally leave the sign until the very end of the year, beginning of the new year. So, half of 2020 has been a story of Mars in Aries and Mars retrograde. So today what I want to talk about is Mars being retrograde in Aries. What does it mean that Mars is in Aries? How does that different than other signs that Mars could inhabit? What is the meaning of a retrograde in general, and what kind of things to watch for in this retrograde in particular? Then tomorrow, what I will be doing is taking Mars through the 12 houses. So we're kind of breaking this up into two parts. In part one today, like I said, we're going to look at the meaning of Mars in Aries, the meaning of Mars retrograde, and the general themes to watch for. And then tomorrow I'll take it through the houses. I think I'll do a live cast through the houses too, which could be really fun to do a little bit more Q&A. But if you have questions today about Mars's retrograde or Mars in Aries at all that are not specific to your birth chart, just general questions about Mars retrograde, feel free to enter them into the chat box as I go along. I'll do some Q&A at the end. So Mars right now, as we're speaking, is stationed, which means it's not moving. It's about to turn retrograde. Turns retrograde like 5 or 6 in the morning here by, what is it, tomorrow, I believe. Let me just make sure I've got that right. So, or is it by, oops, here we go. Yeah, by Friday morning, Thursday, tomorrow into Friday. Let me find the exact hour just because I'm goofing this up right now. So let's see. Yeah, it's going to be, it's September 10th, Thursday, between like 4 and 5 in the morning, something like that. Here, I'm Central Time, USA. So, but you'll feel it over the next 2 days regardless. Then Mars will be retrograde in the sign of Aries all the way up until about November 15th. It's a long retrograde period compared to, say, a Mercury retrograde, which lasts pretty, it's pretty quick. It's just a couple of weeks. You got about 3 weeks, and then it's stationing and turning direct again. Mars will slow down from going from 28 Aries back down to about 15 degrees of Aries. Will station around the 13th, 14th, turning direct between the 14th and 15th of November. So you essentially have almost a little bit more than 2 full months of Mars being retrograde now in Aries. Then it will push forward through Aries, and what you're going to see is by, let's see here, give you the exact date when Mars finally moves out of Aries and into Taurus, which is going to be between January 6th and 7th. So, and this, remember, this started at the end of June, so it's a long period of Mars being in the sign of Aries. Okay, so let's talk first about, very first thing we need to talk about is what we need to know about Mars, right? And what we need to know about Mars in Aries. So remember, Mars is the god. Maybe most fundamental activity is cutting and severing of things, as well as initiating of things, especially of action. So it's a god that initiates action or represents the initiation of action, as well as cutting and severing. And that the manifestations of that are many. You have conflict, violence, hostility, competition, aggression, assertiveness, inceptions, or the beginnings or start of something, like commencing an activity. It's like the blast of a gun at the beginning of a race. You also have Mars as speed, muscle, strength, power, force, will, dynamism. You also have Mars as sort of muscularity and machismo. Especially in Aries, it's its masculine domicile. And let's see, Mars in particular, now, if you take all of those themes and qualities, remember that Mars only gets to express those qualities in a really unprohibited or uncompromised way when Mars is in Aries, Capricorn, or Scorpio. These are its domiciles and its exaltation, the signs in which Mars just gets to be Mars. When you have Mars in any other sign, Mars is basically having to compromise with the host of that sign. So, for example, if you have Mars in Sagittarius, Mars is going to act and behave through the lens of Jupiter. Mars is going to be modified or have to express itself in a kind of compromise with Jupiter and Jupiter's qualities and desires and traits. So that can be for, there's basically three different positions that a planet can be in. It can be like in positive, neutral, or negative. Positive is basically when it's in its own environments, it feels comfortable to be and act like itself. Neutral is going to be when it's in a place that is neither super conducive to helping it nor really harming it. So it's kind of sometimes called peregrine. And then when it's in an environment that's harmful to it, it's going to be debilitated, which doesn't mean that it's all bad. It just means that it has this a little bit more tension or stress in terms of working out its agenda with the other planet's agenda. For example, Mars doesn't do so well in the sign of Cancer, which is the sign of the moon. It's not that you can't come up with positive or constructive meanings of Mars in Cancer. It's just that Mars and the moon, they don't go together as well. Think, for example, of how comfortable a pregnant woman is around someone wielding a knife, right? You know what I mean? Or how comfortable you would be holding a baby while also standing close to a fire or something like that. So there's certain archetypal combinations for planets and signs that are a little bit more challenging or stressful, and the language of essential dignities in ancient astrology is really beautiful. And once you understand it, at a deep enough level, you can really use it quite artfully in interpretations, making all different kinds of interpretations and seeing it at work in lots of different ways. So, that being said, Mars in Aries it's very natural for Mars to do Mars-like things. For example, over the course of these summer months, I have seen more people talking about, starting things that they have been meaning to start for a while, taking up a diet or an exercise regimen that they've, fallen away from, or they've started a project at work, or they're being more aggressive or assertive, or whatever the case might be. So you see a lot of people expressing a greater like motivation or desire to act or assert themselves, or to be bold, or more almost like athletic or driven. You know what I mean? So there's a lot of like take action, and it's time to take action, and you see a lot of that right now in people's lives. If you're an astrologer, I mean, I would say that's probably something that a lot of astrologers would agree upon right now. Now, of course, a powerful Mars isn't always a good Mars. You can see very strong, dominant Mars-like themes that are truly just very difficult. An increase in belligerence or conflict or hostility or accidents or injuries or inflammation or irritation. And those things can be really strong. It depends on what each person's natal karma is like relative to Mars. Okay, so, but that's the gist of Mars in Aries. It's just a lot easier for Mars to be Mars, whether that's good or bad, kind of depends on each individual and their birth chart, which is why it's hard to do mundane, work in general. You can kind of give people the lay of the land as to what the transit and archetypes entail. But, a lot of the times for a bigger thing like a Mars retrograde, or, it's a long transit, or even like, long, if you're, we talked earlier this week, for example, about Neptune and the sun. You have a long Neptune sun transit going on. You can be like, well, how does that affect me if Neptune is transiting my natal sun in my birth chart? It's like, well, that's a much deeper conversation that really depends on a lot of the rest of the context of your birth chart. So a lot of things in astrology are like that, where you can get a glimpse of what's going on, but then there's usually a deeper level of natal analysis that's required simultaneously. But there's still a lot that you can get out of understanding not just Mars and Aries, but in particular what a Mars retrograde is all about and what it's likely to produce, what kinds of experiences or effects you're likely to see. Tomorrow, like I said, I'll be doing another live cast. I think it'll be a live cast where I will take Mars through all of the 12 houses by whole sign house so that you can get a sense of what themes or topics might be activated depending on what your rising sign is of your birth chart. And that'll help you to get a little bit more specific as well. But now let's talk about retrogrades. What are they? You've probably heard me talk about this before. A retrograde it's actually, in some ways, it's such a simple phenomenon, but in other ways, this is very eloquent underlying metaphysical dynamic that ancient astrologers had in mind when they were thinking about the motions of planets that has to be unpacked in order to understand what's really going on during a retrograde. So, for example, every day when you look at the sky, everything is being carried in a general sense from rising in the east to culminating above to setting in the west. And that motion happens every 24 hours thanks to the rotation of the Earth on its axis. From our geocentric perspective, that motion is the singular, grand, unifying motion of the cosmos. From an ancient esoteric perspective, that motion was seen as the motion of the divine. Nothing is bigger than it. Nothing moves faster than it. It is all consuming and everything moves. Everything is moving according to this prime generating motion. Now, interestingly, planets along the ecliptic, that is the path of the sun, which defines the zodiac, the mathematical circle of the zodiac, planets are moving against the grain of that primary motion. They're moving, relatively speaking, they're moving from west toward the east, so counterclockwise, whereas the primary motion is moving clockwise. Well, what did that represent for ancient astrologers? Well, for ancient astrologers, that was a depiction of the world of shadows that we live in. For example, in this world, what is it comprised of? It's comprised of individual spirit souls that are all having our own little separative choose your own adventure experiences, right? And to the extent that we do not see the way in which, as spirit souls, we are little sparks of the fire or part and parcel of the divine whole, we experience a kind of temporary illusion of separateness. And the planets moving against the grain of the primary motion were the gods of karma that ruled over the fluctuations of material karmic experiences in this separatist illusion that the soul is going through. However, for the student of astrology, for the one who studies the planets, for the one who studies karma, and for the one who sees the planets set amongst in the backdrop of the primary motion, one starts to perceive the spirit soul in the karma, or one starts to perceive divinity as the larger law of the cosmos. So that rather than being caught up in the highs and lows of fortune and the fluctuating wheel of circumstance, which all of the planets and their idiosyncratic movements against the grain of the primary motion depict, one starts to see themselves instead as an eternal spirit soul that's part of this grander motion. In which case, the planets go from grabbers to graspers. That is, they go from things that sort of grab us and possess us and define our orbit. They sort of lock us into these little prisons of not realizing who we are in this larger divine picture that we're a part of. They go from that, like just kind of indifferent bureaucratic administrators of fate and karma, to the guides that help us to start to see divinity reflected in the journey that we're on. And I talked about this the other day when I talked about 10 things that I've learned in 10 years of professional astrology, that basically the difference between people who are, more or less happy in the world versus those who aren't, as far as I've seen in so many clients over so many years, is that people who start walking a spiritual path start seeing the ups and downs of their lives as all something that all of it is leading them home. And that is exactly what that is exactly what the purpose of ancient astrology was. Why do we study the movements of these planets? Not because we want to get so invested in them, because if we do that, then we forget this larger motion that's carrying all of it. But we study it specifically so that we can start to see the movements of our karma within the larger generative force or motion or Tao of the universe, the larger hand of God. So why is all of that important to a retrograde? Because what happens to a retrograde planet? The retrograde planet starts moving against the grain of the primary motion in a sort of separatist illusion, you could say, or it's more encased within that, to suddenly falling back into the primary motion. It suddenly starts moving backward, which is to say it starts moving with that clockwise motion. And when it does that, though it can be very frustrating, and I'll explain why in a second, though it can be very confounding and frustrating and can signify things that are difficult, it also represents the seeming separateness of the planet and whatever it represents that attempts to be separate within us, suddenly falling back into the larger hand of divinity. So let me try to explain this now in terms of the different kinds of things that you can see playing out during a Mars retrograde. For example, if Mars represents the will, right? Mars represents the will. And you think now, well, what does a separatist will look like? In other words, what does a will look like that does not realize I'm a spirit soul that is a part of God? Well, that spirit soul, the will, is going to look like I'm doing my own thing. I'm in charge of everything. I'm the measure of all things. I'm in control of all things, and I have to make things happen. I'm pursuing happiness that's for me, etc. So it's sort of separatist, selfish, and very strong and willful. And to a certain extent, we're all like that. Like, no, I mean, I can be like that, in 1 minute, and and maybe chill out 10 minutes later. You know what I mean? So we fluctuate. We go in and out of these states of consciousness. But for the separatist Mars, that's not in touch with this larger sphere, right, of the primary motion, the will is frustrated when Mars goes retrograde, right? I'm trying to do something, and suddenly I lose the ability to do it, and I fall back into a force and a will that is greater than my own. So the individual will can be frustrated. Now, the frustration that comes up is an opportunity for us, of course, to do something like surrender. So it's a very beautiful dynamic where you can easily feel frustrated, your will can feel frustrated, but it also provides you specifically with an opportunity to remember it's not my will but thine, so to speak, or it's let me align my will with the greater way, with as they call the Tao, the way, right? So how do I align my own force, my own power, my own agency, autonomy, and will? How do I align it with something bigger than me? That's an opportunity provided to us in moments when the will breaks down and can't assert itself in the way that it would like to, or it's frustrated or limited or blocked. All of things which a Mars retrograde can imply. It can imply setbacks. Well, I was hoping to do this, but now I have a setback and I have to wait. And the sense of being forced into a waiting room is also amplified by the presence of Saturn, who is right now in a superior square to Mars, overwhelming Mars a bit. So frustration, setback, delays as well. I mean, it doesn't last forever. A retrograde eventually turns direct again. So it can be setbacks and delays, but not that everything is lost. But that these setbacks, frustrations, and delays are also offering us an opportunity for release and surrender is integral to the understanding of retrogrades in general, but specifically Mars retrogrades. When the larger universe tries to assert its will, and we have to align ourselves with it, or potentially be even more deeply frustrated. So in other words, okay, I'll give you an example. Last night, we had this little plan for the evening. This is what we're going to do. This is our little plan for the night. And my daughter was like spinning around she was like a whirling dervish, just like spinning around. And all of a sudden, as she was spinning, she slammed her foot into the table, a wood coffee table. And then she was just like howling, right? So super Mars retrograde, here you just had an accident. And then my wife is like, oh my God, is her toe broken? And I'm like, rub some dirt on it, or like where we all had our responses to it. And the bottom line was that our little plan for the evening got sort of hijacked for the moment, right? It was like, no, this takes precedence now. And I was frustrated because I was like, she's fine. And I could tell she was fine. And, but more than But my wife was like, well, let's just pause and sit here, and I was like, I was all frustrated because I was like, no, we have a plan. Like, come on, let's just keep going. This is stupid. She's fine. And blah, blah, blah. And I had to catch myself and be like, well, this is such a super Mars retrograde moment. Something is not going as I had planned. Something is not turning out as I liked. And I'm trying to bulldoze ahead. And that's probably not the best thing to do here. So it can be very, very small moments like this, but you will experience them more than usual on the day to day, where that sense of this is the plan, this is the action, this is the course, and suddenly, boom, a frustrating thing comes up that makes you feel like you're out of control, but that also offers you this really, it could be a big opportunity, it could be a very small opportunity, but either way, it's an opportunity to surrender. Now, I always joke too that a retrograde is like, think of a planet moving along through the zodiac, and like as it moves degree by degree, it's like chomping up degree pellets like Pac-Man. 6 Aries, 7 Aries, nom nom nom, 8 Aries, 9 Aries, nom nom nom. And then when it turns retrograde, it's like Pac-Man goes backwards and starts barfing out the pellets, right? So what does that represent symbolically? Well, it would represent things that have been gained or consumed or taken or earned being given back. Maybe just temporarily, but that there can be loss in that, or that another way of thinking about it in general is that retrogrades mean reversals. So that whatever has been gained is being given back, or whatever you thought you were doing, suddenly you're turning and going back the other way, and so forth. So larger forces coming in and frustrating, delaying, blocking, setting back, reversing, but constantly offering for some degree of release and surrender. One of the boldest prayers that we can pray, this is what my spiritual teachers have taught me, in at least for sure in the Bhakti tradition, to a certain extent in the Christian tradition I grew up with. One of the boldest prayers we can pray is to, if you think of petitionary prayer, like you're going to, let's say you do a little prayer journaling, or you're just kind of talking to God or talking to source or whatever, in on a walk you take or something like that. And you say, this is what's on my mind. These are the outcomes that I'm anxious about. This is the outcome that I'm hoping for, blah, blah, blah. It's fine to voice those things, but you know what? It takes a lot of courage to say, and I want to add here that I don't know what is best for me. I don't know what I really need in the grand scheme of things, not just in this moment, but how it will serve the trajectory of the rest of my life or future lives as I continue to grow spiritually. I have to admit that these are my wants and needs and requests, but I really don't know what's best for me. So please just do whatever is best for me and help me to accept whatever comes, knowing that it's best for me. Like, wow, that sucks. You know what I mean? Like, that's such a hard prayer to pray. At least for me it is, because I know that as soon as I pray that prayer, I really have to put myself in neutral, and just be like, look, I can't, I know that I don't have enough knowledge, and I don't have enough bandwidth to know, in the broad spectrum of the universe, being an eternal spirit soul, in the process of awakening. I don't know. I don't always know what's best. And my will is not always a very good, I'm not always a good judge, and I don't always use my will very well. Like my way or the highway doesn't really work so well every time I try it. So there's a really brave prayer that you can pray during a Mars retrograde, and that is just, the not my will but thine prayer. But you don't have to phrase it that way if that language is, weird to you. You can just be like, look, these are my requests, these are my asks, these are my concerns, but at the end of the day, just do what you want. I trust you. Say that to your guides, say that to the universe, say that to God. And I guarantee you that Mars retrograde periods, the change that you feel within by praying that prayer of surrender every day is huge. It helps, in my experience, to also make your requests known, to make them really blunt and obvious, because something about just hearing the echo of your own needs, desires, and paranoia or worry or concerns or whatever it might be in your head, and then surrendering it and then offering it up and saying, but I don't know, just do what you want. I'm your servant. that's very powerful. And that if you get really clear about it, if you write it down or just say it out loud and then surrender it, that Mars retrograde periods will really help you grow and mature in relation to these things. So, all right. Now, the other thing is to remember that Mars is related to martyrs and to the surrendering, or not surrendering, but the sacrifice of ourselves, our time, our money, our energy, our resources for something that we believe in or are advocating or fighting for. And during Mars retrogrades, there's also a question about how much sacrifice is healthy or unhealthy. If you're someone who's, tends to be a little bit more selfish, these periods can invite you to care more about others than yourself and to sacrifice and to become an advocate, a protector, a guardian, a caregiver, a devoted servant to something or someone that's bigger than yourself. On the other hand, if you tend to be someone that habitually seeks approval or validation, or you constantly try to seek love through giving too much of yourself or through being too much of a passionate advocate or something like that, you might learn how to slow down, keep better boundaries, hold a little bit more rather than give too much, or come to recognize that you are valuable whether or not you're saving others or saving the world. I've given an example. I had a friend when I was living in New York City who I would call, like, jokingly would call a militant vegan, because it was like all of the right ideas and thoughts in terms of taking care of animals, the environment, eating well, eating right. But this person just had a way of clubbing people over the head with it. And, I would kind of call them out on it a little bit, now and then, in a joking spirit, because they were my friend. And I saw them at a certain point in their life really deeply, fundamentally change how they approached people talking about veganism, which is like their thing, right? They're like a health educator and so forth. And interestingly enough, it happened during a Mars retrograde. So I always remember that story with Mars retrogrades, because it is also an opportunity to lay down your sword and take a different approach, one that is not as confrontational, as much about power struggle or dominance. There's so many things that we think that there's no way that I can be right about this and not have to engage in a power struggle with someone else who doesn't agree with me. It's as though if someone disagrees with me and I don't fight, it means that somehow I'm agreeing with them, or that my own ideas are not legitimate or something like that. Like, we're constantly baited, aren't we, on social media all the time? Anything happens in the world whatsoever, and we think, well, if I don't, throw down and enter the ring and start duking it out with people about this, then it means I don't care. We could be deeply surprised by the fact that we can care very deeply about things. We can find meaningful actions to take in the world, and it doesn't mean that we have to engage in polarizing civil discourse or shit talking or gossiping or making fun of people or acting self-righteous or constantly getting into it with other people or trolling people or whatever. So there's another thing. I mean, this is one of the things that came into for example, when Mars retrograded in Aquarius a couple of summers ago. When it was in my 10th house in Aquarius, in my career house. And I used to be much more into debating over different astrological doctrines and teachings and thoughts and theories and techniques and stuff like that. And during this Mars retrograde, I realized what a complete and utter waste of time it was. Even though I'm very passionate about things in astrology, and you'll definitely hear me on my soapboxes from time to time, I no longer participate in forums. I no longer debate with people for the most part. When people, throw shade on my YouTube wall, I just delete it. Like, it's the kind of thing where that Mars retrograde was so important for me in terms of realizing what a waste of my time it was to be engaged, especially in like astrological forum debates. It was such a huge time saver for me in my career. I'll never forget it. So anyway, the futility of certain kinds of Mars activities, that could be a big part of it. Don't be surprised, for example, if on the mundane sphere, we see all sorts of things continuing to develop around the military, around athletes, around, like, for example, it would not surprise me at all if in the next week or two we saw big reversals or big changes or big announcements or reversals of fate or fortune surrounding the professional sports leagues, around stars in the sports industry. The whole sports industry will be probably a big topic this fall during Mars retrograde between now and the middle of November. You could also see, incredibly important discussions about, the use of force in the justice system, in the police, and things like that. We're going to be doing a lot more to look at the mundane elements of this. Remember, as Mars turns retrograde and goes into a square with Saturn and Pluto and Jupiter, we'll have an opportunity to look at Mars more carefully in terms of what you might see in the collective this fall, which should be pretty loaded, at least in the US, since it's election season. So, you also have to look at the potential for loss of, where the reversal that can come up is giving up something. It feels like you're losing something. But again, here's a daring position to take. If you feel frustrated, something's being taken away from you right now, something that you were maybe pretty pumped up about, just take it as a test. Well, am I capable? How can I put this? Can I be strong in a different way? When someone takes away your enthusiasm and suddenly you feel weak and defeated and you get childlike and impudent, and you start, I don't know, you start throwing a tantrum existentially because things didn't go your way. It's like, well, how great was your enthusiasm? How strong are you really? If when things don't go your way, you can't square up and be like, okay, that sucks, but I trust that, it just wasn't meant to be. It's hard to do that and not to act out and react and flip out and throw a little tantrum. I know it's hard for me. Like last night, my whirling dervish daughter and her busted toe like really threw me off course. What a stupid thing to throw me out. Like I honestly do. I do better with bigger things in life generally than I do with small things when this kind of stuff happens. Like if someone was like, hey, plans changed and this, you were going to take some kind of big trip and now you can't because of COVID-19, I would be like, okay, well, let me just accept that. But if my daughter's stubbed toe ruins the next half an hour of activities, I tend to have a meltdown. You know what I mean? It's like so stupid. But don't be surprised if the challenges that come are really little. Sometimes they'll be big and sometimes they'll be little, but either way, remember that when things don't go your way, see if you can find strength in being accepting. It's a different kind of strength that will aid you, in a way that's far more helpful in the long run than the kind of strength that we get when momentum is going forward and we're moving forward toward our goals and we're feeling like we're winning in life. That kind of success and strength doesn't last very long usually, and it is no fan of its opposite. So going back to the martyr-like quality of Mars, to lay down our sword in some way and to become more deeply accepting of things that we aren't in control of. Remember that confinement and discipline are also a part of this, with Saturn figuring so prominently into the mix with Mars right now. The confinement or discipline of Saturn. Oh, you want to be strong or great or successful or victorious, Mars ruled things. Well, you don't get there just by, big ideas. You have to work for it. That's Saturn speaking, right? Or you have to show some discipline or patience or endurance, or you have to stick with something for a long time. And there's this feeling of sort of being cooked in the frustration of it for a while. It's like, it's like the picture of in a movie or something of like someone who's trying to, maybe they've been falsely imprisoned, right? Or maybe that they're trying to refine themselves or rehabilitate themselves, somehow in prison. And it's the picture of them, pumping out a bunch of push-ups in their little prison cell. There's this feeling of like, okay, I'm confined, but I'm going to work within confinement. In spiritual life, sometimes there's this myth that in order to progress spiritually, we have to do the equivalent, like spiritual push-ups or something like that. And then you advance spiritually. It's a funny, weird thing. It's like a paradox that in spiritual life, it's not by our own effort, it's by grace. It's by, um, unconditional love and grace that flows into our lives that we make any progress at all. It's not by effort. But at the same time, this grace and this love entering our lives is not cheap. We have to knock on the door and ask for it authentically. We have to open our hands to receive it authentically. And you don't have to have any merit to knock at the door. You don't have to have any pre-qualifying, letter from the government saying that you're allowed to do something. You don't have to. There's no credentials needed to knock at the door. You just knock. But the mistake that we make is in thinking we can cheapen grace by thinking, that we knock once and that's it. Knocking is an ongoing activity. Opening our hands to receive grace and love is an ongoing activity. We have to keep putting ourselves in the position to receive what's being given. We have to keep putting ourselves in the position, to ask that our hearts be open, that our minds be open, that love increase, that our spirit soul be awakened. We have to do that daily. That's why almost all, I don't know of one spiritual tradition from, shamanism in the jungles to yoga in India that I've been exposed to that doesn't say, look, daily there is a certain degree of austerity that's required. You have to be patient and persevering in the way you knock at the door and in the way you open your hands. It's not that it earns you something, but you have to show that you're really willing. You have to be a beggar at the gates and just keep sitting there shaking, shaking your pan, being like, hey, please give me something here. Please give me love, give me light. And the more that you do that as a daily discipline, as a daily habit, the less that the concept of effort or earning something is a part of your psyche at all. But ironically, there is an effort that has to be made. It's just that it's like a relationship. Think about it like if you're courting someone, you send them notes, you send them flowers, you take them out, you court them. You know what I mean? And there's an effort in that. But ultimately, when the love starts flowing, it's also not earned. It's not a reward that you get. Someone will say when you're courting them, it's not like, well, good, you brought flowers, check that off the list. Oh, good, well, you said the right thing and you opened the door for me, so check that off the list. It's that somehow in the process of, I remember like when I was dating my wife, and there was this moment where it was like, she could tell that I was sincere, that I really liked her, and she started being able to see who I was, right? And that happened through the ritual of like courting and dating, right? So there's these kind of rituals that we perform, but then as God sees, hey, this person's sincere, they're not going away, their heart's really in it, and they're trying, then the doors open freely. You didn't earn that. You just sincerely asked for it. And so you sincerely receive. There's sincere reciprocation. You know what I mean? So that's a Mars retrograde thing, though, that we go from Mars being, I'm the one who gets, I'm the one who does, I'm the one who earns, I work and I get and I consume and I take and like that, to realizing that that's a frustrating way of existing. That will, that wears down the wheels. You know what I mean? It leads to a breakdown. So, but there's another way in which we have to remain persistent. If you're persistent in authenticity, if you're persistent in humility, if you're persistent in service and devotion, if you're persistent in love and showing up and trying to be the better person, but knowing you can't do it on your own. But if you're persistent in that, well, I mean, think about it. I have family members, people that I know in my life who've been sober, for example, for 30 years, day at a time. It's a practice of staying sober. And every day, part of the practice is also saying, I can't do this on my own. It's right? Like I'm helpless in a sense, but there's a way in which you have to embody that helplessness, that surrender. And what is that doing? Well, that's building up the actual and authentic spiritual agency that you have is found in locating yourself in that humility. So that's the persistence and the will and a correct use of our will to locate ourselves in that surrender. From that standpoint, we not only do we receive and is everything added to us, but also we find alignment with things that and others in the world and the divine flow in the universe that brings deep and lasting happiness. So it's a weird paradox. People typically want to go in one direction or the other. Well, it's either I'm doing it or it's either I do nothing, right? So, no, we have to, in order to receive, we have to sincerely ask. And to sincerely ask is a practice that requires perseverance and hard work. So anyway, that's what I have for today. I'm going to look and see if you guys have any questions for me. And like I said, tomorrow we'll be going through the houses so that you can take your rising sign, like Aries rising, Taurus rising, and we'll look at Mars through all 12 houses tomorrow to give you a sense of what house topics might fit with your birth chart. But if you guys have any questions, I'll see if I can take a few right now. Can you make a video contrasting the 7 planetary retrogrades? Well, the sun and the moon never go retrograde, right? So we have you're just dealing with Mercury, Venus, Mars, Jupiter, and Saturn. And Jupiter and Saturn go retrograde for very long periods of time. These are things that I cover in my course because they're a little bit more in depth. And I don't like to teach some of these topics outside the context of a more structured and guided approach to astrology on the whole, because I think it confuses people. So I'm very particular about that. But yeah, let me just go through and see if there's other questions. But that's a good question. Sorry, I can't answer it. What does it mean, if anything, when a planet is strong in one sign, it rules for the other sign? Affects Scorpio placements when Mars is strong in Aries? Yeah, that's a good question, Shay. There's a concept called lichen girding, right? Which is when a planet, obviously all the planets except for the sun and the moon rule 2 signs each, one masculine and one feminine. So there's really beautiful esoteric reason for that too. But when you have Mars, say in Scorpio, the topics of Aries in the birth chart will also usually go well for the moment, because whenever Mars is well dignified in the chart, exaltation, by domicile or exaltation or whatever, typically the places that it rules will be ruled over more effectively. So, I don't know if you have, let's see, if I can't think of an example off the top of my head, so I'm sorry, but yeah, look at the place of Scorpio in your chart right now, because that place can be affected as well. That's the gist of it. And probably when Mars is strong, positively, when it's retrograde, that place could also experience those topics of that Scorpio house could also experience a little frustration. How do you tell which planet is in the superior position? That is a little bit more complicated. I've covered that in some of my other videos. I need to use the chart on the screen to show you how. But the gist of it is that when Capricorn comes before Aries in zodiacal order, so everything to the right of Capricorn, if you imagine a planet looking into the center of the wheel from whatever sign it's in, everything to the right of that planet in zodiacal order up to its opposition, it will be in the superior aspect too. So, and if it's to the left, like in this case, if you go from Aries and look toward the center of the circle from Mars, and then to the left will be Saturn and Capricorn, that means that because Saturn is on Mars's left-hand side, that Mars is inferior to Saturn. I know it's a lousy explanation without a screen that I can demo it on for you. How does Mars retrograde work with starting a new fitness workout plan? Good. You just have to be careful of being overly ambitious and then, hurting yourself. It can also mean that Mars retrograde, workout. I mean, generally it would have something to do with like accidents or setbacks or injuries, or needing to take a modified approach or returning to something from the past that worked for you before. Yeah, you just have to be careful about, usually with a workout thing in a Mars retrograde, it's going to be like something that frustrates you and kind of holds you back a little bit. For example, for me, I've shared this before. Like for me, definitely, I got back into my kind of healthy workout routine that I usually have had up until kid number 2 came, and it's just been being really careful as Mars is getting closer to stationing. For example, I noticed that my knee was getting a little bit sore, and so I just took out like high impact things, and I'm just being really, really careful because I know that Mars is stationing square with Saturn. Like, you can't overdo things right now. You'll get, your will get thwarted if you try to move forward without any caution. Mars retrograde will be worse than the conjunction that made with Pluto, Saturn, Jupiter in March, April. Worse, different, just different. We'll come back to that when I do a video on the squares. How might this current Mars retrograde specifically affect those with natal Mars in Aries? Yeah, well, look at the house topics, right? It's a big time for you in the house topics of that Mars. If they're in your 10th house, it's career and so forth. But yeah, this is if you're an Aries rising, Scorpio rising, this is a big one for you. If you've got Aries in house 1, 4, 10, or 7, this is a big one for you. And those house topics will be pretty deeply impacted if you have that natally. Let's see. Doing a medical treatment, I'd have to look at your chart. Yeah. Can you do a podcast regarding the treatment of connection, interaction of mind and heart in Hellenistic astrology? Sure. Well, you have to remember that the there's a lot of interesting overlap between the Eastern and like Indian cosmology and metaphysics and the Western, and they're not identical, but they're very similar in a lot of cases. And the simple thing I can tell you is that the mind and heart are deeply connected. They're not like dual. Like today we're like, oh, you're so in your head, you're not in your heart. For ancient astrologers, like, if to really be in your mind as a philosopher, for example, if you're a real philosopher, meaning you're looking at the stars and questioning your own existence, your heart and your mind are open simultaneously, right? Well, some people will also falsely say that ancient Western astrologers were heady and rational and philosophical. It's like not accurate. They were also contemplatives, right? Contemplative means that there's a heartfelt devotional element. There's emotions, there's ecstasy involved in what they're doing. So the two are intimately connected in terms of the view of enlightenment. It's not just a rational construct. Really enjoy your series on the Upanishad and the Hermetica. Any plans for another book read along? Yeah, I'm doing one right now on my Bhakti channel with the Sri Ishupanishad, which sometimes I just have sort of called the Bhakti Upanishad. So if you are interested in the Bhakti Upanishad and a survey of that sacred text, you can check out the Bhakti page of my website, nightlightastrology.com. If Mars is in bad dignity in a birth chart, are Mars transits more difficult for that person? Yeah, generally speaking, not transits to the natal Mars will be more difficult, but if Mars is a time lord and you have a roughed up Mars in your chart and then you have a big Mars retrograde, like, yeah, that could be a little bit more difficult, but it depends on a couple of other factors too. It's not a simple formula. Most things in ancient astrology aren't. There's like a few layers of analysis that you have to do. Hi, Achuta. Any advice on how to keep an even temper during Mars retrograde? My wife did a really good talk on on my channel. She came on and we did a talk about herbs for Mars retrograde. I've been taking stinging nettles, really good for in terms of like an herbal remedy. Yeah, I mean, for me, there's just nothing better than like having daily mantra meditation. Like I really don't know what I would do if I didn't have time every day to just power off and connect to source, open my heart and mind, be still, listen, receive. I have to do it every day. So I can only say that it's a great time to take up some kind of practice like that, some kind of meditation, or like I just have to unplug a little bit. Is there any advice regarding Mars retro 6th regarding persistent health problems? Well, yeah, that's a tough one. It's a good time to try to take it more seriously if you've been ignoring it or not taking it seriously enough, that's for sure. If not, then it could be just another period of difficulty. I mean, some of us just have difficult health karma. There's not necessarily the way that we suffer it is more important than whether it gets fixed or not sometimes. And then other times, a transit to the sixth could be a way of needing to address a health problem in a new way or a different approach or something like that. How is Mars retrograde affecting those that have been used to taking from others in a lack of integrity or dignity way? Wow, that's a big question. I mean, it doesn't affect everyone in the same way, right? A Mars retrograde can sometimes, put the hurt on for people who have Mars karma, right? So if you have bad Mars karma and you treat people in a certain sense, you treat people like crap, or maybe you get really walked on by other people, either of which could be bad Mars karma or difficult Mars karma. Then these Mars retrogrades can bring up tests or challenges. Someone will. I mean, think about, I don't know. There's just sometimes people you finally go too far and you hurt someone and then you get held accountable for it. That could be a Mars retrograde kind of thing. Someone walks on you and you finally decide to stand up to them. That could be a Mars retrograde thing. Is Mars stationing in a birth chart any different than a Mars retrograde? Yeah, well, is it stationing direct or is it stationing retrograde? That's really important as well. But yeah, that's you want to pay special attention to any kind of stationing planet or a planet that's first appearing as an evening or morning star can have a really big meaning in a birth chart. How long is the wait for your natal readings? 7 to 8 months. But I do have I have a horary service, which is typically a couple of weeks for direct outcome oriented questions, which is also cheaper. And then I have a mini reading, which is essentially like 15-20 minutes of research, 15-20 minutes of me just recording you a reading based on like maybe 1 or 2 questions that you have. So there's kind of like a mini reading that I offer, which is still really good. And that's typically within 30 days as well. So those are some options that I've tried to create for people who, might be open to something that's a little bit more concise and focused, and it doesn't take me as long to do. You can check those out on my website, nightlightastrology.com. Let's see. I can't speak to the Indian charts, Rohini. Thank you for your good question. But if you're an Aries rising, let's say, or you have Aries on one of the angles, it's a very powerful transit. It depends, of course, on what else is going on natally, always. But if it's in your first, it can affect health, or it can be more psychologically impactful. If it's in the 10th, it can affect action in the world or your career. The 7th, your relationships. 4th, home or family. I'll be going through all those placements tomorrow. Let's see. 3rd house Mars perfection year. Well, I mean, simple one would just be to watch Mars things related to transit or travel or your car or, computer technology, communication, the mind, stuff like that. Oh, what should we do to embrace retrograde Mars? I think I've addressed that pretty good. Might have to start a new role within the same company, was previously working in that division, but now being offered an elevated role. Is it okay to start during the retrograde? Well, I mean, I again, like without seeing your whole chart, I wouldn't feel comfortable giving a yes or a no to that. But a Mars retrograde, if it was hitting your career house and you have an adjusted role or title or something, would not necessarily be a bad thing. No, I wouldn't be afraid of it. Just go with it. Know that it could change, but go with it, because that could be the reversal itself. Generally speaking, it's like you know something by its seeds. You know what I mean? Like, when something is first starting and you look at the conditions surrounding its inception and you feel into them, and not just like looking at the astrology superstitiously, but I mean, oh, my arch rival was fired, and I helped them to get fired because I wanted their job, and now it's being offered to me. Should I take it? Whoa, like be careful of that, as opposed to, I've worked really hard and someone retired and now I'm being offered the new job. Is it okay? Like, by the seed, the inceptional space, as much as you can feel into it, you usually know whether something is, you're dashing into something in a foolish manner, or there's a reversal or a shift that's happening that feels natural. And people are if you just sit a little bit, you can be intuitive about it. The thing that doesn't help us to be intuitive, honestly, is like if your head is too full of information, your body is too full of chemicals, you don't have enough sleep, you don't have enough water, and you don't have any way of sitting regularly to empty yourself and of the log jam of information and experiences, it's really hard to judge whether or not what to do and what not to do, or how to respond or react to changing circumstances in your life. So my best advice is kind of like, you have to address that big picture if you want to be able to make such decisions for yourself without feeling like you're at the whim of mercy of the planets. Okay, so that's what I've got for everyone. I hope that this was interesting. It's almost an hour now, so I'm going to stop. And I hope you guys have a very good day. And we will, tomorrow, I'll be back taking Mars through all 12 houses as it turns retrograde. All right, have a great afternoon, everyone. Bye.